Welcome to Outside of Normal. This is What I Think. Brought to you by the host of Outside of Normal, Russell Brown. Our first topic in this series is the Constitution. Our last episode we went over the preamble. This week we go over the First Amendment. Alright, so this week with the First Amendment, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are commonly known as the Bill of Rights. These were set up to let people know what the rights of the individual are, the citizens, and how the government should be set up. And within that, you got the First Amendment. And with it, I'll go ahead and read it. It's Congress shall make no other. I'll start over. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So with that, let's break down the four things that the First Amendment are guaranteeing to the citizens of the United States, people who have legal right being here, who were born here, or find themselves living here. These are all guaranteed rights of the American citizen. So in this, you got the concept of the government can't establish a religion, which means they can't pick one religion over another and say that's the religion of our government. They also can't prohibit you from exercising your religious beliefs in any setting, and that's important because of some of the laws and things that have been passed over the last 30 years regarding prayer in schools, prayer at public meetings, prayer at football games, sporting events, that kind of thing. All that is related right here, and we'll get to that in a second, but we move on here, and the next thing they tell you in here, so you got religion. They can't establish a religion, and they can't prevent you from exercising your religion. Second thing is, they cannot abridge the freedom of speech, which means they cannot tell you what you can and cannot say. They cannot tell you because you're speaking out against the government that you have done anything illegal and put you in jail for it. So if you speak out against the president and say he sucks, that is perfectly acceptable. What's not acceptable underneath that we'll also get to, but let's see. What else? Oh yeah, the freedom of the press is also covered in the First Amendment. And our right to assemble and our right to petition the government. These are the petition to government and right to assemble fall under the same category there of protest and peaceful protest and such as this. So kind of clump that together. But we'll look at it and we're going to go through it. And so we'll look at religion first. Alright. Congress makes no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. Alright, within that it's saying that when Congress is formed, back in, and this was all ratified back in 1789, that what was going on in England was you had the Church of England and you had the King, and with that you had them working kind of hand in hand. What the church wanted promoted, the King would push through, and then what the King wanted promoted, he would push through the church. and he'd get the church leaders and the bishops and archdiocese and all them to kind of sway what the populace was thinking through religious terms. And so when the founders came over here, they wanted to eliminate that. They didn't want the government to ever be able to step into your church and tell the minister or reverend or whatever you want to call them over that church what they would have to tell their congregation. And they didn't want the government to be able to step into religion. That's why they're not able to establish a religion or say that this religion is the official religion of our country. Because once they did that, then the government would have its hand in religion again, and that's something that the forefathers definitely didn't want at all. They were against politics and religion mixing on their level of politics being able to tell you what's going on in your church, how you should worship, what things you should and shouldn't do based on the government. So that goes the establishment part of it, the right to express your religion. And this is where it gets tricky, because over the last 30 years or so, you've had court rulings which says that you as an individual can't express your freedom of religion in a public setting because it may or may not be offensive or go against the religious beliefs of others. That is not in the Constitution. That is not in the First Amendment. Oh God, I just scared crap out of myself. That's not in the First Amendment. What is in the First Amendment is that you have express freedom to exercise your religious beliefs. So with just in the terms of what the forefathers wrote there, and obviously it's been revised since because people are snowflakes, and you don't want to offend anybody in today's world, so you have to let everybody do what they want to do, and except for if the minority gets upset with it, and then you have to change your direction and go a different way. So what happens is, with city council meetings, with public forum events like sporting events, or even in school, you can't have a public official or a school official or anybody from the government lead that prayer, because then at that point it seems like the government's establishing a religion. However, the individual person, like a student, or and this is why you have Fellowship of Christian Athletes at schools, and this is they have prayer around the flag day and all that stuff that goes on, and sorry about that, and that kind of stuff that goes on, because the individual can have free expression. But if you're an individual in a capacity of leadership through the government or through any kind of public funded entity, you're not allowed to express your religious beliefs to the people under you, because, like I said, that'd be establishing a religion through the government, and that's not allowed. And that's why you have all these court cases and all this stuff that's come through, that where certain townships have been sued and they're no longer allowed to do a prayer before a meeting or after. They can do it individually. If they come in and individually want to say a prayer to themselves, they can do that. But you cannot lead a prayer in a public setting because of the fact of establishment. But the whole reason that that's there is to keep the government out of religion, not to keep religion out of the government. You can have religious people run your government, they just can't establish their religion for the masses. And it's definitely a separation of church and state. And but a lot of people get it confused. A lot of people look at the First Amendment and be like, well, you can't bring your religious beliefs into the government, and that's not true. It's encouraged, actually. If you read the articles of Confederation and some of the papers that were written before the Constitution, you can see where the people who were in office did have religious backgrounds, whether it was Quaker, Protestant, Catholic, whatever. They had a religious background somewhere in there, and they leaned upon their religious beliefs in order to make decisions for the government without actually, using the government as a platform for their religion. And that's the key to it all. You don't want to, you can have a religious person run your government, like, take John Kennedy. He was Catholic. He really wasn't a devout Catholic if you look at the things he did in his life. But needless to say, he was Catholic, and it was one of the running points that he used when running for president. That he was a sound family man, that he was Catholic, that he had a firm belief in God, and that he ran on that platform as being the first Catholic to run for president and successfully get elected, by the way. And but he never established Catholicism as the religion for America. He never said, America, now we recognize Catholicism as our religion. He never did that. But he did use the fact that he had a religious background in order to run for the office of president. And you can do that. You can totally express the fact that you have a religious background. You can totally express the fact that what your religion is. You just can't impede that onto anyone else in a public forum. And so that's where the establishment of the First Amendment with the government can't recognize any religion and you have the freedom to exercise your religion is. And that's how that gets explained. Then you move on and it comes to the protections of the freedom of speech, like the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition. Underneath this freedom of speech, you do have the three little categories there of the press, peaceful assembly, and petitions. So we'll go with the press first. Obviously, with the First Amendment, you have the ability to say whatever you want to. Like, you can speak against your government, you can speak against the tyranny or the oppression or whatever it is, the slight grievance that you have against the government. You're allowed to go out there and communicate that in a public forum without any fear of being censored and that good jazz. But there are three things that are restricted under our freedom of speech, and it's time, place, and manner. And the limitations based on time, place, and manner apply to all speech, regardless of the view expressed. They are generally restrictions that are intended to balance other rights or a legitimate government interest. And so you can't go out there and you can't go out there and promote child pornography, for an example. That's restricted freedom of speech. You can't go out there and threaten people. That's a restricted freedom of speech. You can't go out there and use what they call quote-unquote fighting words, which means you can't go out there and entice someone else to get into a physical altercation with you. That's illegal. That's called assault. Battery is actual physical contact. But assault, you can verbally assault someone through fighting words, quote-unquote fighting words. Incitement, defamation, fraud, obscenity. These are all things that are not protected under freedom of speech. So if you get out there and technically, if you get out there and just start running your mouth at somebody and you start cussing them with obscenities and you're inciting them into a physical altercation, that's illegal. You can't do that. But outside of those, obviously you can't go around and slander someone's name. That can bring up a civil lawsuit, and it's against the civil laws. But it's really narrow, the restrictions we have on our freedom of speech here in America, which is an awesome thing. Which also brings up the peaceful assembly. You're able to protest. You're able to go out there with your picket signs. You're able to do sit-ins. You're able to do marches. This became really important through the 60s and the civil rights movement. When you had sit-ins, you had lockouts, you had the march in Washington. I mean, all these things progressed the civil rights of the African American during the 60s, and without this being in the Constitution, a lot of that wouldn't have happened. And they utilized the Constitution to its maximum benefit during the 60s, 70s, and the Civil Rights Movement that came and followed henceforth since. Also, with the LGBT community, now you look at them, they're able to do their pride marches and all the stuff that they're able to do, and they're able to put awareness out there for the LGBTQ community because of this First Amendment. And without that, small interest groups, small minorities, and people who aren't of the, people who just aren't of the majority would have no leg to stand on. They would have no tools to use in order to gain equality on any levels. So that's a very important part of our First Amendment, is that freedom of speech, freedom to assemble and protest, and as peaceful means. So when say you look back when Malcolm X was by any means necessary, that's not true. By any means necessary meant a lot of people went to jail. But if you look at the way Martin Luther King Jr. did it, and he was all about the peaceful protests and by peace by any means on his side, that's why a lot of the things that he wanted to push for and a lot of things that he wanted to do were legal and were able to be done in a peaceful manner, where the Black Panthers and Malcolm X obviously had a lot more trouble with the law and everything else, but that's because of the First Amendment. And then you have, lastly, the right to petition, which, to be honest, the right to petition really doesn't, it's a freedom, it's a right. You can petition the government, you can petition your local government, you can petition your federal government for any grievances you have against them, and you get enough signatures, I think it's 100,000 signatures maybe, that you get in the government, and the Congress has to recognize the petition. Whether they vote on it or leave it on the floor or whatever happens after that is obviously up to the Congress. But you do have the right to petition. I'm not sure that too many petitions from the average citizens ever went anywhere in Congress. I'd have to actually do a little bit more research on that to find out what cases there are where petitions have been pushed through. But usually petitions go and you get enough signatures and they'll sit there and they'll hit Congress and they'll be brought up to the floor and they'll be left on the floor with no vote. So you can take that with what it is. But that is our First Amendment, and those are the rights that sit within our First Amendment. That is what the law is saying inside that First Amendment. Any misconceptions about the freedom of religion part or the freedom of speech part, where people are like, I can say whatever I want to. No, you can't. You can say whatever you want to within reason, and with, as far as you can say whatever you want to against the government. You can speak against the government. You can come out and protest against the government, but you can't slander. You can't incite people. You can't promote child pornography. You can't, with intent, create fraud out of whatever you're saying. So even people that are promoting Ponzi schemes and stuff like that, not that I won't bring up any names, but people that I know of that are even promoting the Ponzi schemes, that is illegal under the First Amendment. And but with that being said, that is our First Amendment. That is what the rights are saying, and I appreciate you joining me for this episode and being on here with me. This is what I think, and this is our First Amendment. Next week, we'll jump right into the Second Amendment, which is, we'll start getting a little deeper. The conversations start getting a little heavier, starting next week with the right to bear arms and the Second Amendment, and what it says about the states able to have their own militia and all this other stuff that goes along with the Second Amendment that we will talk about next week and we will go over. And that's a hotbed topic because of, all the school shootings and everything going on and how people relate to what should be put out there as gun laws. And a lot of that's covered under the Second Amendment. And some things that people want done and think they're just not legal because of the Second Amendment. But we'll get into that next week. I do appreciate you being here this week. I am Russell. I am the lead host of Outside of Normal. And this is what I think. Join us back here next week. New episode dropping next Friday.